She's a convenient piece on the board, Marcus. Nothing more. The deep, resonant baritone belonged to David King, a man the financial press and underworld alike had dubbed the Alpha King. Lisa stood frozen in the shadowed hallway, the heavy crystal tumblers slipping from her numb fingers to catch silently on the thick Persian rug. A cruel, rumbling laugh followed, slicing through the heavy oak doors of his study. You actually think I'd let a civilian complicate the syndicate merger? Lisa plays her part perfectly. When the ink dries, she'll be compensated and dismissed. Lisa pressed both hands over her mouth, suffocating the jagged sob clawing at her throat. 3 years of whispered secrets and promised futures reduced to a punchline in a ruthless game. She didn't scream. She just turned around. The silence in the penthouse was usually a luxury, a soundproofed fortress suspended 60 floors above the manic pulse of the city. Tonight, it felt like the suffocating vacuum of a tomb. Lisa moved down the long, art-lined corridor with the careful measured steps of a ghost. She couldn't feel her legs. She couldn't feel the chilled hardwood seeping through her silk stockings. All she could hear was the phantom echo of that dark, amused laugh rattling inside her skull. Compensated and dismissed, she pushed open the heavy mahogany door to the master suite, slipping inside and pressing her back against the wood. The room was bathed in the pale, icy glow of the city skyline pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. For 3 years, this room had been her sanctuary. David had built an empire on ruthlessness, earning his alpha moniker by tearing down rival corporations and swallowing their assets whole. But with her, he had been a quiet storm of fierce protection and gentle hands. Or so she had believed. Her eyes drifted to the walk-in closet, a sprawling space larger than her first 3 apartments combined. Rows of designer gowns, pristine tailored coats, and shelves of leather heels stared back at her. Every single item had been curated, purchased, and gifted by David. It was a wardrobe designed for a queen. Lisa walked slowly toward the vanity. Resting on the marble surface was a velvet box containing the diamond tennis bracelet he had clasped around her wrist just 2 nights ago. "To anchor you to me," he had whispered against her neck. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the clasp on her wrist. The metal felt heavy, sudden, and foreign. It took 3 attempts with shaking hands to undo the intricate lock. The diamonds caught the city light as the bracelet slipped off, landing on the marble with a sickeningly sharp clink. Next went the pearl earrings. Then the platinum watch. She wasn't a queen. She was a prop. A calculated asset meant to project stability while he finalized the most dangerous merger in his company's history. Lisa stripped off the emerald silk dress, a piece David had specifically requested she wear to dinner tonight. It pooled at her feet like liquid glass. She stepped over it, moving toward the very back of the closet, past the racks of cashmere. Tucked away in a dark corner was a small, battered duffel bag she had brought with her on the day she moved in. Inside it lay a pair of faded denim jeans, a worn gray oversized sweater, and scuffed leather boots. The clothes she had worn the day David King walked into the quiet, failing bookstore where she used to work, ordering a black coffee and staring at her as if she were the only thing in the room. She pulled the rough denim over her legs. The fabric was stiff, lacking the soft give of the tailored clothes she had grown accustomed to. But it grounded her. It felt like reality. She pulled the sweater over her head, the wool scratching against her collarbones. There was no frantic packing, no dramatic throwing of items into a suitcase. To take anything he had given her would be to accept his compensation. She would not be paid off. She walked over to the nightstand, picking up her sleek, top-of-the-line smartphone. She held the power button down until the screen went black, then placed it deliberately in the center of the crisp, white pillows on her side of the bed. Beside it, she placed her heavy ring of keys, the master key to the penthouse, the key to the private elevator, the fob to the armored SUV. A sudden, muted thud echoed from the other end of the penthouse. The study doors opening. Lisa froze, her breath snagging in her chest. Heavy, confident footsteps began to echo down the hallway. David. The rhythmic strike of his leather shoes against the floorboards was a sound she usually anticipated with a warm flutter in her stomach. Now, it sounded like the steady beat of an executioner's drum. She had minutes, maybe seconds, before he entered the bedroom. She backed into the shadows of the closet, pulling the louvered door nearly shut, leaving only a sliver of space to watch. The bedroom door clicked open. David's towering frame filled the threshold, silhouetted by the dim hallway lights. He loosened his silk tie with one hand, his broad shoulders rolling to release the tension of the evening's meeting. He smelled faintly of expensive scotch and the heavy, metallic tang of the city air. "Lisa?" His voice was a low rumble, devoid of the sharp cruelty she had heard in the study just 20 minutes prior. It was soft, searching, deceptive. She held her breath in the dark, pressing a hand flat against her chest as if the sheer force of his presence might make her heart beat loud enough to give her away. He walked further into the room, tossing his suit jacket over an armchair. He didn't turn on the overhead lights, navigating the space with the ease of a predator in its own den. He moved to the bathroom, leaving the door ajar. The sound of running water filled the suite. Lisa knew this routine. He would wash his face, brush his teeth, and then check his secure tablet one last time before coming to bed. She had a 5-minute window. Slipping out of the closet, Lisa moved with absolute silence. She didn't head for the main door. David would see her from the bathroom mirror. Instead, she moved toward the private terrace. The floor-to-ceiling glass doors were thick, but she had oiled the tracks herself months ago when the squeaking had interrupted her morning reading. She slid the glass open a fraction, the biting November wind instantly lashing across her face, stinging her cheeks. She slipped through the gap, closing it silently behind her. The terrace wrapped around the eastern side of the penthouse, leading to an emergency fire stairwell that David's head of security, Vance, had insisted on installing. The wind howled, tearing through her thin wool sweater. She had no coat. She had left her designer trenches in the closet. The cold was shocking, a violent physical reminder that the insulated, artificial world she had lived in was already gone. Lisa reached the heavy steel emergency door. It was alarmed, hooked directly into the building's central security grid. But Lisa remembered a passing complaint David had made weeks ago. A glitch in the system that caused the eastern stairwell sensor to drop out during the nightly server reboot at exactly 2:15 a.m. She lifted her bare wrist, forgetting she had left the watch behind. Panic flared. She had no idea what time it was. She closed her eyes, trying to calculate. The meeting in the study had ended. David had taken his time finishing his drink. It had to be close. She pressed her hand against the cold metal lever, waiting. The digital keypad next to the door glowed a steady, hostile red. She watched it, her teeth chattering so hard her jaw ached. Click. The red light blinked out for a split second, shifting to an unlit, dead gray as the system reset. Lisa shoved the lever down and threw her weight into the door. It popped open. She slipped through the threshold just as the light flared red again, the heavy door slamming shut behind her with a definitive, hollow boom that echoed down the concrete shaft. She was in the stairwell. No cameras. No heat. Just 60 flights of concrete stairs spiraling down into the underbelly of the city. Lisa didn't hesitate. She began the descent, Her leather boots slapped softly against the concrete, a rhythmic, descending metronome. With every floor she passed, a layer of the life she had known peeled away. By the 30th floor, her legs were burning. By the 15th, her lungs ached from the dust and the cold. When she finally reached the ground floor, she pushed through the exit door, bypassing the grand marble lobby entirely, stepping out into a desolate, garbage-strewn alleyway. The city was a sprawling, indifferent beast around her. Sirens wailed in the distance. The neon sign of a closed bodega flickered violently at the end of the street. Lisa reached into the pocket of her jeans, her fingers brushing against a tightly folded wad of cash. $600 she had kept hidden inside the binding of an old paperback novel, a remnant of her paranoid, scraping by past. It was all she had in the world. She pulled her collar up against the biting wind, turned her back on the towering glass monolith of David King's empire, and walked into the shadows. She packed nothing. She left no note. And before the dawn could break, she was gone. The digital clock on the nightstand clicked to 6 a.m. David King woke with the precision of a man whose internal clock was bound by billion-dollar market openings. He didn't stir. He simply opened his eyes, his mind instantly sharpening to the day's tasks. The syndicate merger was entering its final, volatile phase. Marcus needed the offshore accounts verified by noon. David rolled over, instinctively reaching out a heavy, scarred hand to pull Lisa flush against his chest. He expected the familiar, soft warmth of her skin, the scent of vanilla and sleep. His hand found empty, cool cotton. David frowned, sitting up. The vast expanse of the king-sized bed was empty. The sheets on her side were perfectly smooth, undisturbed. He rubbed a hand over his face, dismissing the immediate, irrational spike of adrenaline in his chest. She was an early riser. She was likely in the kitchen, brewing that terrible, overly sweet tea she preferred over his imported coffee, or perhaps reading in the solarium. He threw his legs over the side of the bed, the cold floorboards bracing his bare feet. He stood, his gaze sweeping the room. That was when he saw it. Sitting dead center on her pillow was her phone. Its metallic surface caught the gray, pre-dawn light filtering through the windows. Next to it, glinting with a cold finality, were her keys. David froze. A sudden, sharp ringing began in his ears. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, picking up the phone. It was completely powered down. He stared at the keys. Lisa never went anywhere without her keys. She was obsessively careful about locking up, a habit from her days living in a rougher part of the city. "Lisa!" His voice boomed through the master suite, entirely different from the soft tone of the night before. This was the voice that commanded boardrooms, the voice that made rival executives sweat. Silence answered him. He pivoted, striding out of the bedroom and moving methodically through the penthouse. The kitchen was dark. The espresso machine was cold. The solarium was empty, her favorite reading chair vacant. The massive, cavernous living area offered nothing but the ticking of the grandfather clock. A cold dread, sharp and foreign, began to uncoil in his stomach. He marched back to the master bedroom, pulling open the doors to the walk-in closet. Everything was perfect. Her dresses were meticulously aligned. Her shoes were paired. But as his dark eyes swept the space, he noticed the subtle, glaring absences. The worn spot on the floor where her old, battered duffel bag usually sat was empty. He turned to the vanity. The velvet box sat open. The diamond tennis bracelet, the pearl earrings, the platinum watch, hundreds of thousands of dollars in jewelry he had draped over her, lay discarded on the marble like cheap plastic toys. She left. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the sternum. He gripped the edge of the vanity, the veins in his forearms bulging against his skin. She hadn't just left. She had erased herself. She took nothing of his. She took only what she had brought with her. David snatched the phone off the nightstand and powered it on. He bypassed the lock screen, he had always known her passcode, and opened her messages. Nothing. No angry text. No goodbye. He dialed his head of security. Vance. David snapped the moment the line connected, his voice a low, lethal vibration. Where is she? There was a brief pause on the other end, the rustle of a man sitting up violently. Sir? Where is who? Lisa, David roared, the composure he was famous for fracturing entirely. Where the hell is Lisa? Check the lobby cameras. Check the private elevator. Now. On it, boss, Vance said, his tone turning crisp and professional. Keys clacked rapidly over a keyboard. 30 agonizing seconds passed. David paced the length of the bedroom, his jaw tight enough to crack teeth. Boss? Vance's voice was tight. The private elevator hasn't been engaged since you came up last night. The lobby cameras show nothing. The front doors haven't opened since 1 a.m. She didn't evaporate, Vance. David snarled, raking a hand through his dark hair. He stopped pacing, his eyes falling on the glass doors leading to the eastern terrace. He walked over, noticing the tiniest smudge of a fingerprint on the edge of the glass. Check the emergency stairwell, David ordered, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. The eastern shaft, another pause. Then, Vance cursed softly. Got a system log. The magnetic lock on floor 60 popped at exactly 2:15 a.m. during the server reboot. It bypassed the alarm. David closed his eyes. The memory of the night before rushed back to him with sickening clarity. He remembered standing in his study with Marcus. He remembered the heavy tumbler of scotch. He remembered the strategic lie he had told to keep Marcus from viewing Lisa as a target during the merger. She's a convenient piece on the board, Marcus. Nothing more. He remembered laughing. A cold, hollow sound meant to sell the lie to a dangerous man. David opened his eyes, staring out at the sprawling gray city below. She had heard him. She had stood in the hallway, listened to him tear her worth to shreds to protect his own plays, and she had believed every word. Find her, David said into the phone, the command lacking its usual thunder. It sounded almost desperate. Put every man we have on the streets. Trace the cameras in a 10-block radius of the alley exit. I don't care what it costs. He hung up, staring at the empty bed. The Alpha King had won the boardroom, but as the cold dawn broke over the city, he realized he had just lost his empire. The rain began on her third day in the shadows. It was a cold, driving downpour that washed the city streets into a blurry canvas of gray and neon. Lisa sat in the corner booth of a decaying diner on the absolute edge of the city limits. A place where the towering skyscrapers of David's world were nothing more than jagged teeth on the distant horizon. She wrapped her hands around a chipped ceramic mug, letting the heat of the bitter, burnt coffee seep into her cracked skin. The $600 she had smuggled out of the penthouse was already dwindling. 3 nights in a nameless motel with water-stained ceilings and a lock she had to reinforce with a desk chair had cost her $150. Food, a cheap burner phone she kept turned off, and a heavy thrift store canvas jacket had taken another chunk. She was disappearing, shrinking back into the invisible girl she had been before David King's tailored suits and private elevators. Before the bookstore, before the silk dresses, Lisa had been a ward of the state. She had bounced through 6 different group homes between the ages of 8 and 18. The system had taught her one invaluable, brutal lesson. If you want to stay hidden, you don't run fast. You run quiet. You leave no paper trail. You don't log into old email accounts. You don't call old friends. You become a ghost in the machine. You going to order something else? Or just rent that booth for the day? Lisa looked up. The waitress, a woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and a name tag that read Elena, was wiping the adjacent table with a bleach-soaked rag. Her tone was rough, but there was a calculating curiosity in her gaze. "I'm looking for work," Lisa said. Her voice was slightly hoarse from days of silence. "I can wash dishes, wait tables, mop floors, whatever you need." Elena paused, the rag stilling on the formica surface. She looked Lisa up and down, taking in the faded jeans, the oversized sweater, and the dark circles bruising the skin beneath her eyes. Elena's gaze lingered on Lisa's hands. Despite the recent cold and the thrift store jacket, her fingernails were perfectly shaped, remnants of a $200 manicure. "You don't look like a dishwasher, honey," Elena said flatly. "You look like someone's expensive mistake running from a bad night." Lisa didn't flinch. She met the older woman's gaze with a hardened, deadened stare that she hadn't had to use in 3 years. "I look like someone who shows up on time, doesn't complain, and prefers to be paid in cash under the table. Do you need the help or not?" A tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the hiss of the fry cooker in the back. Finally, Elena tossed the rag over her shoulder. "Minimum wage. Cash on Fridays. You break a plate, it comes out of your cut. You start in the pit back there. I catch you stealing out of the register. I don't call the cops, I call my son, and he throws you in the dumpster. Understood?" "Understood," Lisa said, sliding out of the booth. "What's your name, runaway?" Lisa hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Sarah." For the next 10 hours, Lisa stood over a steaming stainless steel sink, scrubbing hardened grease off industrial baking sheets. The hot water scalded her hands, turning them raw and bright red. The air in the kitchen was suffocatingly humid, smelling of old fry oil and bleach. Her back ached, a sharp, shooting pain radiating up her spine from standing on the unforgiving tile floor in her worn boots. It was absolute agony, and it was exactly what she needed. The physical pain was a screaming, immediate demand on her senses, drowning out the phantom echo of David's laugh. Whenever her mind drifted back to the study, to the scent of his scotch and the devastating cruelty of his words, she would plunge her hands deeper into the scalding water until the physical burn overrode the emotional one. By midnight, when Elena locked the front doors, Lisa was exhausted to her very marrow. She collected her small envelope of cash, nodded to Elena, and stepped out into the freezing rain. As she walked the 4 blocks back to her dismal motel, a sleek, black SUV with tinted windows rolled slowly past her. Lisa froze, her breath catching in her throat, her heart slamming against her ribs like a trapped bird. She pressed herself into the shadows of a brick alleyway, pulling the canvas collar over her face. The SUV continued down the street, its taillights bleeding red into the puddles, turning a corner and disappearing. It wasn't him. It was just a car. But the terror left her shaking violently against the wet brick. She wasn't just hiding from a broken heart. She was hiding from a billionaire with the resources of a small nation. She was playing a very dangerous game of hide-and-seek with the devil. And she knew she couldn't outrun him forever. 60 floors up, the air in the boardroom of King Enterprises was suffocatingly thin, thick with the scent of fear and expensive cologne. David King sat at the head of the long obsidian table, his posture immaculately straight, his tailored charcoal suit unwrinkled. To the casual observer, he was the picture of terrifying control. But to anyone who looked closely, to his head of security, Vance, who stood silently by the door, the Alpha King was fraying at the edges. His eyes were hollow, rimmed with the deep purple bruising of a man who hadn't slept in 96 hours. The knuckles of his right hand, resting flat on the table, were white. Across from him sat Marcus, the head of the rival syndicate. Marcus smiled, swirling a glass of sparkling water. He was a predator who thrived on leverage, a man whose legitimate business fronts barely concealed a network of violent extortion. The offshore accounts are verified, David. Marcus purred, leaning forward. The merger is ready for signatures. We become the largest logistics conglomerate on the eastern seaboard. But you seem distracted today. Everything well at the penthouse? Where is the lovely Lisa? I was hoping she'd grace us with her presence at the celebration dinner. David's jaw tightened so hard, it sent a sharp ache up into his temples. He held Marcus's gaze, his own eyes flat, obsidian, and utterly dead. Lisa is in Geneva. David lied, his voice a smooth, glacial slide. Visiting her sister, she won't be attending. A shame, Marcus murmured, his eyes glittering with a sudden, sharp interest. I wasn't aware she had family in Europe, or family at all, for that matter. There is a great deal you aren't aware of, Marcus, David replied, leaning forward slightly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Keep your focus on the shipping manifests, or we'll have a problem that your lawyers won't be able to fix. Marcus raised his hands in mock surrender, but the vicious smile remained. An hour later, the boardroom emptied. David remained at the table, staring blindly at the leather portfolio in front of him. The heavy wooden doors clicked shut, leaving him alone with Vance. "Report," David commanded, the word cracking slightly. Vance stepped forward, dropping a thick file onto the table. "Nothing, sir. It's like she ceased to exist. No credit card pings, no ATM withdrawals. Her social security number hasn't been flagged for employment anywhere in the country. We've checked hospitals, bus stations, train manifests. We've paid off every dirty cop and private investigator in a 50-mile radius. Zero." David stood up so violently, his heavy chair crashed to the floor. "People don't just vanish, Vance. She has $600. How far can she get on $600? Far enough if she knows how to stay off the grid," Vance said quietly, not flinching at David's outburst. "With respect, boss, you coddled her. You kept her in a gilded cage. I think we underestimated what she learned growing up in the foster system. She's not running like a scared civilian. She's evading like a professional." David placed his hands on the table, bowing his head as a wave of absolute, crippling nausea washed over him. He had been so arrogant. He had thought he was her savior, pulling her out of her struggling life into his world of endless luxury. He hadn't realized that the survival instincts forged in her youth had never died. They had merely gone dormant. He closed his eyes, the memory of her in the study returning to haunt him. She's a convenient piece on the board, Marcus. Nothing more. He had said it to protect her. Marcus had been digging into Lisa's background, looking for a pressure point, a weakness he could exploit to gain the upper hand in the merger. David had known that if Marcus believed Lisa was beloved, she would become a target, a kidnapping risk, leverage. So, David had played the role of the cold, unfeeling sociopath. He had laughed at her expense to convince a monster that she meant nothing to him. He had saved her life, and in doing so, he had destroyed her soul. "Marcus knows something is wrong," David said, his voice dropping to a harsh, raw whisper. "He was testing the waters today. If he finds out she ran, he'll know she's vulnerable. He'll put his own hounds out to find her." "What's the play, boss?" Vance asked. His posture straightening, David lifted his head. The despair in his eyes was instantly locked away, replaced by a terrifying, absolute resolve. The Alpha King was back, cold and calculating. "We control the narrative," David said, straightening his suit jacket. Call my public relations director. Tell her to draft a press release. Set up a press conference for tomorrow morning. Sir, what are you going to announce? I'm going to cut the tether, David said, his voice devoid of all emotion. If Marcus wants a target, I'll make sure he knows she isn't worth the bullet. It was week 2. Lisa's hands were permanently wrapped in white athletic tape to cover the cracks in her skin, a makeshift armor against the relentless onslaught of industrial soap and scalding water. She had been promoted from dishwasher to waitress, though she wasn't sure if it was a promotion or a punishment. The diner was packed. It was a miserable Tuesday night, the rain still lashing against the grease-stained windows. Lisa moved between the tables with a practiced, robotic efficiency, balancing 3 plates of meatloaf on one arm while pouring coffee with the other. Hey, sweetheart. A heavy-set man in a dirty mechanic's uniform slurred, grabbing Lisa's wrist as she set down his plate. His grip was tight, bruising. Coffee's cold, and you forgot my extra gravy. Lisa froze. A week ago, she might have apologized profusely, her voice shaking, desperate to avoid conflict. But the exhaustion had burned away her capacity for fear. She looked down at the man's hand, clamped around her wrist, then slowly lifted her gaze to his face. She didn't pull away. She just stared at him. She channeled every ounce of the terrifying, dead-eyed stillness she had watched David use 100 times to break stronger men than this mechanic. Her expression was completely blank, her eyes flat and empty, radiating an icy, lethal calm. "Let go of my wrist," Lisa said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the din of the diner like a straight razor. "You will get your gravy when I bring it. If you touch me again, I will pour this entire pot of boiling coffee into your lap. Do we understand each other?" The man blinked, visibly startled by the sheer, unadulterated venom radiating from this small, tired waitress. He let go of her wrist quickly, muttering an apology into his plate. Lisa turned away, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She retreated behind the counter, leaning against the pie display to steady her shaking hands. Well, Elena muttered, sidling up beside her and wiping the counter. "Didn't know you had that kind of bite in you, Sarah. You looked like you were ready to kill him. I learned from the best," Lisa whispered bitterly, rubbing her wrist. The realization sickened her. Even out here, stripped of everything, David's shadow was still draped over her. She was using his weapons to survive. "You don't belong here, girl," Elena said quietly, her rough voice softening just a fraction. "I don't know who you're running from, but running only works for so long. Eventually, you run out of road, or you realize you brought the ghost with you." Before Lisa could respond, the volume on the small, ancient television mounted in the corner of the diner spiked. "Turn that up," a customer shouted from the counter. Lisa looked up. The screen was grainy, but the image was unmistakable. David. He was standing behind a podium in the grand lobby of King Enterprises, a bank of microphones bristling in front of him. The news chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Liv, King Enterprises CEO, addresses syndicate merger." Lisa stopped breathing. He looked immaculate, invincible, dressed in a sharp black suit. But his face was tight, his jaw clenched, and there was a dark, dangerous energy rolling off him even through the television screen. Beside him stood a man Lisa recognized from the study that night. Marcus, looking smug and predatory. A reporter in the front row stood up. "Mr. King, there have been rumors regarding the stability of your personal life impacting this merger. Your fiancée, Lisa, hasn't been seen in public for weeks. Care to comment?" The diner fell silent, watching the billionaire on the screen. Lisa gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles turning white. She braced herself for the lie. He would say she was sick. He would say she was traveling. David leaned into the microphone. He didn't look at the reporter. He looked dead center into the camera lens, his dark eyes seemingly piercing through the screen, crossing the miles of city to find her directly. My partner Lisa and I have separated. David's voice boomed from the cheap diner speakers, cold, clinical, and completely devoid of warmth. Due to irreconcilable differences, the engagement is broken. She holds no ties to King Enterprises, nor to me. She is entirely removed from my sphere. She is no longer my concern, and she will not factor into any future dealings of this company. She is, for all intents and purposes, dead to me. A collective gasp echoed through the diner. Ouch. A trucker at the counter muttered. Cold bastard. Lisa stood paralyzed. The words felt like physical blows, a public execution of everything they had shared. He was throwing her away for the entire world to see. But as Marcus stepped into the frame, a wide, satisfied grin spreading across his face. A sudden, jarring fracture appeared in Lisa's understanding. She remembered Marcus's reputation. She remembered the whispered fears David had harbored about the syndicate's violent tactics. She is no longer my concern. She holds no ties. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. He wasn't throwing her away. He was building a wall. He was publicly declaring her useless, severing all ties so that Marcus would have no reason to hunt her down and use her as a pawn. He was intentionally destroying his own reputation, painting himself as a heartless monster on national television, just to ensure she stayed off the syndicate's radar. He had broken her heart to save her life. Lisa stumbled back from the counter, the noise of the diner rushing back into her ears. The moral absolute she had clung to, that he was a cruel, manipulating liar, shattered into 1,000 complicated pieces. He was a monster, yes, but he was a monster who was tearing his own empire apart to keep her hidden. And now, she had a terrifying choice to make. Keep running, or turn around and face the beast. The revelation on the diner television didn't bring relief. It brought a cold, terrifying clarity. David had painted a target on his own back to erase the one on hers. But Lisa knew Marcus. She had sat quietly at enough formal dinners, observing the syndicate boss over the rim of a crystal champagne flute. Marcus didn't believe in coincidences, and he certainly didn't believe in sudden, clean breaks. 3 days after the press conference, Lisa's instincts were proven violently correct. It was a slow Thursday afternoon. The diner smelled of stale grease and pine cleaner. Lisa was in the back, hauling a sleeve of paper cups from the storage closet, when the bell above the front door chimed. 2 men walked in. They wore cheap windbreakers that failed to hide the bulky, unnatural lines of shoulder holsters beneath the fabric. They didn't look at the menu board. They didn't sit in a booth. They walked straight to the counter where Elena was rolling silverware. Through the narrow slit of the kitchen service window, Lisa watched the taller man slide a glossy photograph across the formica. "We're looking for a friend," the man said, his voice a flat, nasal drone. "Goes by Lisa. Maybe using an alias. Might have come through here looking for a handout." Lisa pressed her back against the cold tile of the kitchen wall, her pulse hammering in her ears. She squeezed her eyes shut. They found me. The $600 hadn't been enough to outrun Marcus's reach. Elena looked down at the photograph, her face an unreadable mask of weathered apathy. She picked at a piece of lint on her apron, taking her time. "Lot of girls come through here looking for a handout, buddy," she rasped. "None of them look like they belong in a magazine. If she was here, I'd remember." "Look closer," the second man urged. leaning into Elena's space, crowding her. "There's a $5,000 finder's fee for a verified location. Cash." Elena didn't blink. She reached under the counter, producing a heavy, cast-iron skillet, and dropped it onto the counter with a deafening clang. "I said, I haven't seen her. Now, you boys gonna order some pie, or are you gonna stop blocking my paying customers?" The men stared at the skillet, then at Elena's unwavering glare. The taller one snatched the photo back. "If she shows up, you call this number." He dropped a business card on the counter. They turned and walked out into the gray afternoon. Lisa let out a ragged breath, sliding down the wall into a crouch. She had 30 seconds. Elena walked briskly into the back kitchen, grabbing Lisa by the shoulder and hauling her to her feet. "Back door, now," the older woman ordered, her voice low and sharp. She shoved a wad of crumpled bills into Lisa's taped hands, her pay for the week, plus whatever Elena had in her own pockets. "They're gonna canvass the motels next. You can't go back to your room." "Elena, they might come back for you. I've handled worse than 2 cheap thugs in bad coats," Elena snapped, pushing Lisa toward the rusted steel exit. "You're a good worker, Sarah, but you bring too much weather with you. Run." Lisa burst out the back door into the alley, the damp chill of the city immediately biting through her sweater. She didn't look back. She ran with a frantic, desperate energy, weaving through dumpsters and chain-link fences, putting as many blocks between herself and the diner as her burning lungs would allow. She couldn't keep doing this. Running blindly was getting innocent people like Elena involved. Marcus was using her to find a pressure point against David. If Marcus found her first, she would be tortured for leverage. She needed to go on the offensive. Ducking into a dimly lit bodega miles away from the diner, Lisa slapped Elena's cash on the counter and pointed to a cheap, prepaid cell phone in the display case. Minutes later, standing under the flickering light of a broken street lamp, she powered the device on. She hadn't brought her old phone, but 3 years of arranging David's private life meant she had certain numbers permanently burned into her memory. She didn't call David. He would be monitored. She punched in a 10-digit sequence and pressed the receiver to her ear. It rang once. "Speak," a gravelly voice answered. "Vance." Lisa breathed, the sound of her own voice shaking in the cold air. A sharp intake of breath echoed on the other end of the line. "Lisa, good God, where are you? The boss is tearing the eastern seaboard apart." "I don't have time," Lisa interrupted, her voice hardening. The ghost of the girl in the penthouse was gone. The survivor from the foster system had taken the wheel. "Marcus's men just found my workplace. They're canvassing. I need a meeting. Public. Nowhere you can be cornered. Nowhere they can grab me quietly." "Name it," Vance said instantly. "We have a team ready." "Grand Central Terminal, the main concourse, right under the brass clock," Lisa commanded, her eyes scanning the dark street for approaching headlights. "1 hour. Tell David if he brings a trailing detail, I'll vanish into the subway tunnels and he will never see me again. Just him and you." She hung up, snapping the cheap phone in half and dropping the pieces down a storm drain. The game of hide and seek was over. It was time to step into the light. Grand Central Terminal was a soaring cathedral of transit, echoing with the chaotic, overlapping symphony of thousands of rushing commuters. The sheer volume of humanity was a shield. You couldn't fire a weapon here without causing a mass panic. You couldn't drag a woman away without 100 cell phones recording the struggle. Lisa stood directly beneath the iconic, four-faced brass clock in the center of the main concourse. She wore her oversized sweater and the heavy thrift store canvas jacket, her hands shoved deep into her pockets. She looked like just another weary traveler waiting for a train. But her eyes were tracking every movement, every anomaly in the crowd. At exactly 7 p.m., the sea of commuters seemed to part near the Vanderbilt Avenue entrance. David King walked onto the concourse. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. She had seen him on the television, but the screen had filtered out the raw, devastating reality of his physical deterioration. The Alpha King looked like a man who had walked through fire. His tailored black suit hung slightly looser on his broad frame. His jaw was covered in a rough, dark scruff, a shocking departure from his usually immaculate grooming. But it was his eyes that struck her. They were frantic, hollow, sweeping the massive room with a desperate, hungry intensity. A few paces behind him walked Vance, his head on a swivel, his hand resting casually near his waist. David's gaze snapped to the center of the room. He found her. The distance between them vanished in a matter of seconds. He strode across the marble floor, stopping a mere 2 feet away. He looked down at her, taking in the faded jeans, the oversized jacket, the raw, taped skin on her hands. A look of absolute, shattering agony crossed his features. He reached out, his large hands trembling as if he wanted to pull her into his chest and never let her go. Lisa took a deliberate, measured half-step backward. David's hands dropped to his sides. The rejection clearly gutted him, but he nodded, accepting the boundary. "You look—" David started, his deep voice thick with an emotion she had never heard him use. "Lisa, you're bleeding." He stared at the athletic tape on her fingers. "I've been washing dishes, David. It pays the rent," she said, her voice terrifyingly steady. Or it did, until Marcus's thugs showed up asking questions an hour ago. David's expression instantly morphed from heartbreak to lethal cold rage. "Did they touch you?" "No. But they're closing the net. I saw the press conference, David. I know what you did." David looked away, the muscles in his jaw ticking violently. "I needed him to think you were worthless to me. It was the only way to ensure he wouldn't use you as leverage. When you left, when I realized you heard what I said in the study, it broke me, Lisa. I lied to Marcus to keep you safe, and in doing so I drove you right into the cold. Why the lie at all?" Lisa demanded, the anger finally bleeding through her composed facade. The noise of the terminal blurred into white noise around them. "For a merger? You tore my heart out for a logistics conglomerate?" "It's not a merger," David snapped back, keeping his voice low but fierce. He leaned in, the familiar scent of his cologne mixing with the smell of ozone and rain. "It's a federal sting, Lisa. King Enterprises has been working with the DOJ for 8 months. Marcus uses his shipping lanes to traffic weapons. The merger was a Trojan horse to get access to his encrypted offshore ledgers. But the man is paranoid. He needed to believe I was as ruthless and soulless as he is to sign the final transfer of power." Lisa stared at him, the pieces violently clicking into place. The late-night meetings, the sudden, extreme security measures Vance had implemented months ago, the cold, unfeeling persona David had adopted around Marcus. "I couldn't tell you," David whispered, his eyes pleading with her. "If you knew, and Marcus caught you, you couldn't have hidden the truth. Your ignorance was your armor. I was supposed to sign the final papers tomorrow, and then it would all be over." Before Lisa could process the magnitude of the revelation, Vance stepped up beside David, his body tense. "Boss," Vance muttered, his eyes tracking the eastern balcony overlooking the concourse. "We have a problem. The perimeter just got breached." Lisa followed Vance's gaze. Standing near the marble balustrade of the Apple Store balcony were the 2 men from the diner. They weren't looking at the crowd. They were looking dead at Lisa. And they were speaking into their wrists. "They followed me," Lisa breathed, a spike of cold terror piercing her chest. "No," David said, his voice dropping into a register of absolute, terrifying calm. He stepped smoothly in front of Lisa, using his broad shoulders to physically shield her from the balcony's view. "They followed the digital ping Vance sent to my phone when you called. I used myself as bait to draw them out." David reached into his suit jacket, not pulling a weapon, but a sleek, encrypted satellite phone. He pressed a single button and held it to his ear. "The signatures?" David asked the person on the other end. He paused. A slow, dangerous smile curved his lips. "Good. Spring the trap." The atmosphere in the terminal shifted with the speed of a thunderclap. The two men on the balcony turned to head toward the stairs, reaching inside their windbreakers. But before they could take 3 steps, a half-dozen commuters, men and women in business suits, tourists in hoodies, a janitor pushing a mop bucket, suddenly moved with synchronized, explosive precision. Glints of silver badges flashed in the harsh terminal light. "Federal agents, drop your weapons. Hands on the railing now!" The shouting echoed through the cavernous space. The crowd around them screamed, fracturing outward in a wave of panic, leaving a wide, empty circle of marble around David, Lisa, and Vance. Down on the main floor, 3 more men in heavy coats, Marcus's backup, tried to run for the Lexington Avenue exits. They were violently tackled to the floor by plainclothes tactical units pouring through the doorways. David didn't watch the takedowns. He kept his eyes locked entirely on Lisa, his body positioned to take a bullet for her if a stray shot rang out. The noise, the screaming, the radio chatter of the FBI agents swarming the terminal, none of it mattered to him. "Marcus signed the final ledger 20 minutes ago in my office," David said over the chaos, his eyes dark and unwavering. "The DOJ has full access to his hidden accounts. The FBI is raiding his compound right now. It's over, Lisa. His entire syndicate is being dismantled. He can never touch you again." Lisa stood still, the adrenaline shaking her limbs. She looked at the men being handcuffed on the balcony, the terrifying shadows that had haunted her for weeks, neutralized in a matter of seconds. The threat was gone. Vance holstered his weapon, letting out a long, slow breath. "Area secure, boss. We need to move before the local press scanners pick up the raid." David nodded slowly, turning back to Lisa. He didn't order her to follow. He didn't presume. The Alpha King, a man used to commanding rooms and bending the world to his will, stood before her completely stripped of his armor, waiting for her verdict. "Come home," David whispered, the words raw and vulnerable. "Please, let me take you home. Let me fix your hands. Let me spend the rest of my life making up for the pain I put you through. Thank you so much for reading." She overheard him laugh about her. She packed nothing and left before dawn. Lisa and David's journey proves that true power isn't about control or wealth, but about the vulnerability it takes to treat the one you love as an absolute equal. It's a story about finding your own strength in the shadows and demanding your place in the light. If this story of intense drama, painful sacrifices, and triumphant, hard-earned romance kept you on the edge of your seat, please consider supporting the content. Drop a like. Leave a comment telling me your favorite twist, and hit that subscribe share button so you never miss another cinematic, high-stakes story. Your support helps bring these characters to life.